Hello, my name is John Senda. I am an osteopath and yoga teacher. First of all, let me tell you that in the description you'll find links to the anatomy of yoga courses, both in person and online. In January, we're starting an in-person course in Barcelona, as well as an online course specifically focused on anatomy for Kundalini Yoga. All the details are on the website. Check it out. Today we're going to talk about why we practice balancing poses. Let's go to the screen. This type of pose is usually not very appreciated in yoga practice because of how difficult it is to hold them for a long time. When you support one leg on the ground and the other in the air, it forces you to activate a specific muscle coordination protocol that we're not used to since it's conditioned by the neural maps of the learning curve. As we've discussed in several videos, here we have the brain. The pink part is the neocortex, and then we have what is called the reptilian brain. The neocortex, let's say the thinking brain, is the one that gives the orders, and the cerebellum, which is located back here, is responsible for coordinating the muscle chains and sends nerve impulses through the brainstem, which is this conduit here, where all the nerves that pass through the spinal cord come out. These are motor nerves. Motor nerves have motor neurons that provide information to the nerves. This information reaches different muscle groups or specific muscle chains to generate movement. But as we already know, the right cerebral hemisphere coordinates the left side of the body, and the left hemisphere coordinates the right side. That's why, when we do, for example, the Garudasana pose, we activate one hemisphere or the other. In order to perform the pose, we need to have it in mind before building it, since this way we activate those neural maps before actually doing the pose. That initial phase, especially when we are learning balancing asanas, it's very important to think about how we are going to do the pose in order to generate those neural maps, that muscle learning, which in the end is nothing more than an arrangement of muscle memories. Then we enter the critical phase, which is the construction of the pose, seeking out the memories of muscular coordination. So the neocortex together with the cerebellum are the ones that will send information to the muscle groups to build that pose. The next phase is technique, which is refinement, making the necessary corrections according to previous muscle learning. This is a learning of fine musculature. The small corrections, the observations of the body, the alignments, the breathing. All those neural maps are built during refinement. And the last phase is dismantling the pose. But you have to dismantle it in an orderly way so that the muscle chains don't cause you to lose balance within the load axis. Because if we look, it's a balancing pose, and if we construct or deconstruct it in an imprecise or disorderly way, we tend to lose our balance. And that's exactly when we lose the benefits of this type of pose. Balancing poses challenge joint alignments and the lines of load and unload. Here we can see that one leg is on the ground, and that leg is going to create tension against gravity. A force to fight against it, the abdominal muscles, the diaphragm muscles, all of that will create a lift. And not only that, but the crossed and lateral muscle chains prevent sliding to one side or the other. The load lines in the joints are very important because when you support yourself with only, for example, the left leg, the pelvis will become misaligned and the entire joint system and the redistribution of forces will be different. In a standing posture, such as Tadasana for example, gravity, pressure and force are theoretically distributed 50% to each limb. When we do a balancing posture, that's not the case. Instead, all the gravity shifts to one leg. And the other leg has to compensate with upward muscular tension. Therefore, balancing postures do not properly align the joints, but that's exactly what we're aiming for, a structural deviation of loads to activate the muscle chains in order to compensate for that lack of balance. Not all bodies are the same. Gravity, the center of gravity, is different for each person. Notice that in Garudasana, gravity, the center of gravity, lowers. Weight, elasticity, strength, muscular tightness. That's why this type of posture needs to find its own balance and create its own neural maps for managing the pose. The best way is japa, that is, repetition, both of the same posture and of similar ones. To develop the learning of brain maps in managing muscle chains influenced by internal characteristics and external factors like gravity. The postures along with their variations, make use of information packets that include the small differences. Here we can see that the same leg is still on the ground. The right leg is now positioned differently, but let's say that the information packets, the file information packets, are more or less similar. So it's worthwhile to do similar or variant postures to take advantage of that information packet, with the small differences that make it much more enriching for the mind, and in this way, avoid falling into uninteresting routines and lack of motivation. Part of the files are transferable in similar postures. That's why it's worthwhile to perform similar balancing postures, which at the beginning of postural construction share those muscle chains. Postural learning is shaped by spatial sensations, that is, the relationship with space, gravity, the place where we are, temperature, color, etc. The joint and muscular sensations in the posture, because here all the weight goes on to the left leg and the body has to compensate. That nervous information about the muscles, thank you. It is the efferent pulse. The efferent pulse is the information that leaves the brain toward the motor nerves and the muscle groups. It is outgoing information for coordination, but this needs to have feedback, which is the afferent information, which goes from the body to the brain and is more sensory information. The body needs to have information to see whether it is doing things correctly or not for muscle corrections, to give orders to the muscle groups. All of this happens through both the peripheral and central nervous systems. The peripheral system would be the nerve groups that are external, and then we have the nerves of the spinal canal of the central nervous system. Vision is one of the pathways for balance, the anchor. To achieve that anchoring, it is recommended to focus on a specific point, so that the muscular coordination system has a fixed point from which it can start as a reference when developing postural construction. The drishtis, in this case, focusing on a specific point, will help us with that focus and give us a central point from which we can work. Which leg do we start with? It depends, as always, on what we want to work on. If we want to activate the right hemisphere of the brain, which is more emotional, we will start with the left leg on the ground. If we want to activate the left hemisphere, which is more rational, we will start with the right leg on the ground. I emphasize starting because the first action has more power than the second, since with the first action, the brain has to activate the file for muscular coordination. On the other hand, with the second action, which would be the other leg, the file is already loaded, it just needs to be modified. The same thing happens on an energetic level. If we place the left leg on the ground, we are activating the Ida channel. If we place the right leg on the ground, we are activating the Pingala Nadi. The Ida Nadi is associated with the moon. It is a more feminine energy, calm, parasympathetic nervous system, rest, cold, humid, dark, and linked to water. Linked to memory, emotions, and intuition. But, on the other hand, if I want to work with the Pingala channel, which is associated with the sun, masculine, hot, sympathetic nervous system, dynamism, passion, conscious mind, analysis, and willpower. That's why we would start with the right leg. Which nadi do you want to start with? That will depend on what you want to work on. Is it necessary to work on both sides? Well, not necessarily. If we only want to activate one nadi, we will work with just one leg. This type of posture coordinates the vertical muscle chains. Both, down toward the ground with gravity as well as against gravity up toward the sky. Within the vertical chains, we mainly have the anterior muscle chains that go from the chin to the tops of the feet, and on the back from the occipital bone to the sole of the foot. These are the main vertical chains that fight against gravity. Simply the act of standing, the automatic vertical muscle tensions fight against gravity, exerting force upward. The sole of the foot, the ground, pelvic floor, diaphragm, the palate, all of these work to fight against gravity. Since it is a supporting posture, the crossed muscle chains, which, as the name suggests, run diagonally, can be either upper or lower cross chains depending on the posture. For the brain, balance postures require the coordination of all the involved muscle chains. This type of muscular work promotes nerve impulses. Thank you. And the neurotransmitters involved, promoting emotional states through energetic and cerebral balance. As part of balance, this is also linked to supporting strength, as we mentioned before, right? It promotes the activation of the central nervous system and stimulates the heartbeat and the lymphatic system. For this reason, these types of postures are beneficial for blood centrifugation and the removal of accumulated toxins. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.